Welcome to the Global from Asia podcast, where the daunting process of running an international business from Hong Kong is broken down into straight-up, actionable advice. And now, your host, Michael Michelini.
Thanks for tuning in again. We're at episode 44 of Global from Asia, and I'm recording today on Chinese Valentine's Day. It's Saturday, August 2nd, and it's never the same day as far as we are concerned as Westerners on the solar calendar. It's a bit tricky to follow, but it's on the lunar calendar. Lucky enough, I got a heads up about it, and I was prepared with some gifts for my wife. Got a WeChat message from a friend. So I picked up some Hong Kong women's perfume and other goodies while I was in Hong Kong and brought it along over the border with me the other day, last week. Also, some other updates. Our Global from Asia podcast was featured in ShenzhenParty.com the other day alongside with my friend JP's China Business Cast podcast. So thanks for being recognized as our podcast. We do a lot of work for getting these things on the show, and I have a feeling there Brent Deverman, who's the man behind the scenes at Shenzhen Party, made that happen, and I know he's a regular listener. So Brent, if you're listening, thanks so much. Really appreciate the support. Okay, now on for the show, we have Loretta, also known as Retta Tam from ACLS Language and Training Solutions here in Hong Kong, and she's going to give us an overview of the translation industry in Hong Kong with dealing with Cantonese, English, and Mandarin. So let's listen up. All right, thank you everybody for tuning in to a Global from Asia podcast. We've had so many different podcasts and shows here, and we still haven't really gotten into translation, interpretation, and all these different languages. I have to be honest that I'm always been a little bit bad at foreign languages myself. I guess I'm a typical, maybe spoiled American dealing with English my whole life growing up. But now being in Hong Kong and in Asia, it's really more of a necessity to deal with all kinds of languages, Cantonese and English and Mandarin. So we're really overwhelmed. So I'm really happy to introduce to us on the show Retta. And hi, Retta. So Retta Tam is a ACLS Language and Training Solutions linguist and anthropologist by training with a PhD in linguistic anthropology and ethnic politics. She's also qualified TESOL, which is Teaching English to Speakers of Other Languages, and TCSL, Teaching Chinese as a Second Language teacher. So being a Eurasian, did I say that right?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
And having lived on 3 continents, she's currently running her own language consulting business specializing in translation, verbal branding, and corporate communications. So thanks so much for being on the show, Retta.
You're welcome. It's my pleasure.
Yeah. I'm sure this is going to be...
And hello, everyone.
Yeah. I'm really excited. And so maybe we get started with our first question I have here is just, I think, a little bit basic, but even I need some help with definitions. I've heard the word linguist and translator, interpreter. Are they the same, different, or maybe you can give us some ideas?
Okay. The definitions do overlap each other. All of these terms refer to people working with languages, and linguists in a loose sense, an umbrella term covering both translators and interpreters. We know this Chartered Institute of Linguists, CIOL, in the UK. They're a good example of employing the term for referring to such professionals. In the academia, though, we tend to regard linguists as experts in language sciences.
Okay.
Yeah. And then for translators and interpreters, the former term, that is translators, refer to language professionals specializing in written translations. Most of my fellow so-called tribesmen are translators by nature. As for the interpreters, this goes to those language professionals translating verbally for a range of formal contexts, such as meetings and press conferences. In the Chinese-speaking world, especially Hong Kong, people tend to mix up these terms, and you may hear locals say, "We need a translator for this conference." Okay, let's face it, this is Hong Kong English, an emergent variant of English in East Asia.
Okay. So I guess that's why I've gotten confused too, because I didn't really need these types of services or have these kind of problems when I was in America. So I guess that's why maybe I've never fully understand. So thanks so much for explaining that. So, lots of businesses, I'm sure listeners and myself, we always need help dealing with written and spoken, and these are different specialties, right? So just like the definitions above, these are different types of services and people that are probably better at it than others.
Yes, there are. The range of specialties are impressive. There are a few indispensable specialties that everyone in business will come across. We knew it. So, such as corporate, IT, legal, and advertising/marketing/PR. Okay, these days with the paradigm shift, it's no longer easy to tell advertising, marketing, and PR copy apart, which explains why we see all these slashes. There are also a good number of specialties focusing on a particular sector or discipline, such as medical, engineering, and aerospace. Take myself as an example. I'm a translator specializing in arts and humanities, education, and the AMPR thing, the advertising/marketing/PR, while being competent in both medical and linguistic validation. So every translator or interpreter has their own strengths and weaknesses.
Okay, no, that makes sense. And also, I guess also to clarify, I call it direction. There's probably a better term, but so say English to Cantonese might be good for some of these people, but others are better with like Cantonese into English. Maybe you can give us some ideas here.
Yeah, you can say that again. Accuracy and fluency are both key to delivery of quality translation and interpretation, which is why most of us translate from a second or foreign language into our mother tongue. It's based around the hypothesis, or you may say a belief that we do best in our first language. Anyway, there are so many bilinguals and polyglots doing two directions or even multiple languages. So it's very common in Hong Kong.
Yeah, that's really cool. So maybe we'll give some more kind of examples coming up. So if a business person is kind of coming to Hong Kong or mainland China for trade shows or visiting companies, factories, etc., what kind of services do you think they could use? And maybe we can kind of get some thought process of what they should think about when they're considering it.
Yeah, Hong Kong is nowadays we call Hong Kong a Chinese Special Administrative Region (SAR), and the former British colony has a set of rules and also hidden rules different from mainland China. I'd suggest business people coming over to Hong Kong for trade show or site visits to hire an experienced local business interpreter. Send inquiries to a Hong Kong-based translation agency, state your needs, and ask them for a quote. Remember, never go to an undergrad or postgrad from mainland China who eagerly offers to help with interpreting matters. Besides the cultural and language differences, it is illegal for current non-local students on student visa to work in Hong Kong without special permissions. And the same maxim applies to the case of mainland China. But the situation is far more complicated than Hong Kong, I'd say. It all depends on which city or province you're heading to. The southern provinces are generally more protective of their own tribe, which means it'd be a good idea for you to hire a local business interpreter speaking the regional dialect while knowing well your culture. If you're going to the border, such as those autonomous regions for ethnic minorities, hiring someone speaking the minority languages will be a plus. You may contact a prestigious translation agency or business consultancy in a major Chinese city such as Shanghai or Beijing for recommendations and quotes, and request for a brief teleconference, just a very brief con call with the candidate before confirming your booking. Perhaps I can share with you a mainland example. A Korean friend of mine once hired an ethnically Korean interpreter born and raised in China for a trip to Jilin province. In Mandarin is Jilin, in Cantonese is Katlam, in northern China. Her supplier was Chinese, and her bilingual local guide actually helped translate both the Chinese language and culture. Well, here I mean the hidden rules for the word culture into what an average Korean can understand. And my friend ended up getting the best bargain thanks to her local guide's brilliant negotiation skills in both Mandarin and the regional dialect. We call that Dongbei the northeastern dialect.
Awesome. Yeah, that's really great. I'm sure a lot of listeners that haven't been to China don't know about these different dialects. So they usually say like you said, Dongbei Hua, right? That's actually a little bit personal here, but my wife is from there, from Dongbei. So,
oh, really? Impressive.
Yeah, from Shenyang. So, so I actually, her family's around and they speak a lot of local dialects. So, like, I try to I'm not still very good at Mandarin, but I'm trying. And I can't keep up with the Dongbeihua, but sometimes the dialects are a little bit similar, but there's definitely a lot of differences. And then even in like Shanghai, they have Shanghainese, right?
Yeah,
So
exactly. Yeah.
yeah, so this is definitely, like, to your point, true, like, to find a local, not just a lot of people just generalize Chinese as Chinese, but there's all these different regions and cultures inside of China. So
Yeah.
so it's really great. So thanks for making that clear. And I think another one I want to kind of like touch upon, which I hope I'm not insulting your industry, but I think of tour guides a lot. So, sometimes in trade shows I go to or conferences in China, they'll have tour guide services. So is this like similar or different, or is there overlap? And of course, I know there's business. Is there a business tour guides, or is this, a lot of times people think of a tour guide and they think of it for like traveling for pleasure. So maybe give us some ideas.
Sure. Apparently, tour guides don't do business the same way as interpreters. In Hong Kong, there is a licensing system for tour guides, but not interpreters. Us is pretty funny, right? But anyway, tour guides might as well serve as local guides, but not necessarily business interpreters. This is the most important thing we need to know. Business interpreters play an important role in closing deals with potential local partners, but tour guides are simply not trained in helping with business talk. So we'd have to be very careful when it comes to the terminology. But there are also a good number of self-proclaimed business tour guides in Hong Kong. They plan and organize specialized trips and site visits tailor-made for various industries. And a lot of them are freelancers. And it'd be good news for those of you who need a personal business tour guide. Their quality of service varies, but you can always request a voice chat before booking confirmation to see if he or she sounds fine. I won't suggest hiring freelancers for group visits, though, as they are apparently less resourceful than agencies. You might wish to go to a local and long-established travel agency for inquiries instead. Quite a number of boutique travel agencies in Hong Kong offer customized group tours for business people. Always double-check the registration status of your potential business tour guide and travel agency to avoid disappointment.
So that's just interesting. So then that covers that point. And another one, it's a little bit, maybe again, we're a little bit broad on this show, but I know this is also some common questions I get is translating websites, business websites, or, e-commerce businesses to Chinese. What is your general thoughts or suggestions in this case?
Translating a website to Chinese, as we know, is different from translating a text or manual. We need to locate the right market and target them with their own variant of Chinese. That's why we need localization experts, that is, translators with an expertise in translating not only the language, but also the culture and technical details. Businesses often got confused at the initial stage by hiring novice translators from a different Chinese-speaking market to do the job. Oh, it's a big no-no.
Yeah, I mean, I think again, I'm not an expert in languages, but like sometimes Taiwanese Mandarin, I know is Mandarin, but it's sometimes even different. And especially, like you said, in the industry, they have to know the industry terms. I've also tried to have people help translate some products or businesses for me, and they need to understand the industry too. So it's definitely a good point to bring up. And another funny one here is personal names. Actually, just this morning before our show, I had somebody ask me on WeChat, a Chinese actually, for an English name. And I've actually given a few English names to babies and for friends. But so personal names and company names being translated, unless maybe, even though I'm more of the English name guy, sometimes just for fun, but let's maybe talk, because we're doing this in English, so I think more people are going to be doing English into Chinese. So what are your suggestions here?
Well, I'm not a fan of personal name translation, but I admit as a gesture of friendliness pretty well received in Hong Kong. Translating personal names into Chinese is the job of senior secretaries in many local organizations, and unless you have a very creative local client who might bother to think up one for you, quality is not guaranteed. Your Chinese name should sound fine in both Cantonese and Mandarin. So if you don't have a local secretary or creative client, I'd suggest setting aside this idea. Chinese folks don't really care if you have a Chinese name or not, unless you speak very good Chinese, and they might be tempted to ask if you have a Chinese name to prove your love for their language. That being said, it doesn't mean too much if you have only a Chinese name and not the language.
Got it.
Yeah, and moving on to the company's names. Well, the big boys usually hire branding agencies to do the job, as we know. If you're on a slim budget, try a translation agency with verbal branding experts. Naming's getting to be, well, we see a very specialized area in which linguists, hopefully with anthropological training too, evaluate names nominated by either the client or the branding team in terms of the target markets and languages.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think my own personal experience. I have a Chinese name, and I don't know if I don't know if I have a Cantonese version, but my Chinese name is Mai Li Ni. It's a really strange Mai, and the character is not very common. And a good friend of mine actually helped me do it. It's based on my family name, Michelini. So he kind of literally translated my family name in English to make it fit in to Chinese. And then I did have one of my first assistants translate my company name many years ago. And then I remember almost immediately I had people saying it wasn't a good name, and they were giving me suggestions for other names. But I think also they can tell it's a foreigner or foreign company, right? Like I know you said you're not a fan of personal names, but I wanted to be like, I want to have Lee in my name, like Bruce Lee, just because thought it was funny. And they told me I couldn't have a Chinese name, family name in my Chinese name if I'm not Chinese, or that's, they were people were just saying it's not allowed or something. But anyway, it's kind of more for fun. And I have some other friends that made really funny Chinese names. Like one is Da Long.
Oh,
dragon, right? So
Da Long. Dragon.
Da Long. And he said if Chinese, because sometimes Chinese pick some really random English names like rainbow or lemon or something. So he thought it would be funny if he gave himself a quote unquote stupid Chinese name. So, but yeah, especially for business, I think business is definitely more important and it should be taken more serious. So yeah, I think it is getting to be a pretty specialized thing. And then another point about business is some of my friends were randomly talking about Coca-Cola, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but I forget their Chinese name, but they have the Chinese characters on their cans.
Yeah.
And he was asking about trademarks, and he says, why don't they just use English name? In China, you could just use your English brand name or your English company name, but I think if you really want to target local Chinese, they don't know any Chinese or English characters, and they won't really remember a foreign name. Even if you think it's like famous as Coke, they even localized their brand. So I think they probably paid a lot of money to translate their words to Chinese. So it's definitely a serious thing if you're serious about China business, to make sure it's a good translation.
Yeah, I take your point.
Yep. And so we're moving along to dealing with a freelancer or an agency, and the thought process in choosing one.
It depends on your needs, I think. I'd go to a freelancer or a boutique agency for highly customized and specialized services, and bigger agencies for large projects presented as company milestones. Budget is, of course, another factor affecting our choice.
True. So yeah, I think probably like smaller companies would use a freelancer, maybe generally, and if you have a better budget agency, or is a price? Do you think is a price about probably the same, or I guess it depends, right? It's hard to say.
Right, exactly. Because these days there are a lot of specialized freelancers, and so they're experts, and they might charge you quite a lot. And this is different from what we used to know about freelancers.
Got it. Yes, the market's definitely maturing for sure. So you got to do your homework. Do your homework for sure. Okay, and now we're going to the next point I have is full-time position. I think a lot of times some business owners, like Westerners, think they can just, I don't want to say just, but hire any Chinese worker that speaks English and can be their, interpreter, translator. I have to kind of admit I used to do that myself.
Yeah.
So, I think that maybe we should just talk about, why that might not always be the best idea. And, it might be good to have experts rather than try to push everything onto a Chinese assistant.
I'd say having an expert outsider and then a full-time assistant for different issues, it's the most viable and flexible option, especially for startup entrepreneurs and small businesses. In both Hong Kong and mainland China, assistants are unfortunately and predominantly young and inexperienced. They might as well be smart, but one can't expect a local assistant to be an all-rounder. So why not outsource the professional jobs to expert outsiders and save the routine tasks and errands for full-time Chinese assistants? It can save you a lot of time and money too.
Yeah, I learned again, maybe sometimes on this show I make fun of myself for my mistakes. So I've made these mistakes too. When, like earlier, I talked about the names. So my assistant translated some of my names and the websites and some of my blog posts, and I think they would even kind of admit they didn't really know how to do it, but I kind of encouraged them to try. So I do agree. Maybe depending on how serious the matter is, and how delicate it is, that you should find the right expert outside to help you. And that kind of leads into the next one. I think for legal, a lot of times we talk about contracts on the show and making agreements with factories or Chinese companies. Or what is your suggestion in these kind of cases?
Legal translation is a tricky thing in Hong Kong as we don't have this sworn translator system. My suggestion is hiring an experienced legal translator with a local law degree to work on company registration paperwork and terms and conditions, plus a lawyer for verifying translations of important contracts and agreements. I suggest playing it safe and so that you can avoid the fuss.
Yeah. That's true. Legal is the most sensitive one, right? You don't want to be cheap on legal translation, and then later it can cost you a lot money. So definitely be careful with those situations. So that was my main last question. Thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing with us, Retta. And I'm sure there's listeners that might need your services, and it would be great maybe if you could share how you work and how people could reach out to you.
Sure. My team and I can be reached via email at info@acls-hk.com. As a boutique consulting business, our account service has gone entirely online. We deliver translations, creative copy, presentation decks, and reports via the internet, whereas requests for hard copies and on-site consultation are also well taken care of. Thank you.
That's so much. Thanks so much, Retta. And we'll put this on the show notes too, and your contact information for those that want to check it out more. So thanks. Thank you, Retta, so much for sharing. I hope listeners are going to reach out to you and maybe use some of your services. I know you did a lot of work preparing for the show, and I really appreciate it. Thank you again. And next week, we're going to have David Chung from Cyberport on the show, which is an amazing facility here in Hong Kong that supports technology and innovative companies. There's a lot of programs for listeners that they can apply to, both financial as well as in support and services. So definitely catch that next week. And thanks everybody for listening. That's a wrap.
To get more info about running an international business via Hong Kong, please visit our website at www.globalfromasia.com. That's www.globalfromasia.com. Also, be sure to subscribe to our iTunes feed. Thanks for tuning in.